The wind howled a desolate hymn around the fragile cabin, a thin wooden shell against the vast, indifferent white. Inside, the cold pressed in, sharp and relentless, seeping into bone despite the meager fire sputtering in the hearth. Alara lay wrapped in damp, threadbare blankets, the fever a burning tide beneath her skin. Each breath was a ragged gasp, a small, desperate victory against the rattling in her chest. Outside, the blizzard had raged for 3 days, burying the world in drifts that swallowed the horizon, silencing everything but the wind's mournful cry and the frantic beat of her own heart. Fear was a physical presence in the room, a cold weight pressing down. Not just the fear for herself, though that was a constant ache, but the terror for Finn, her brother. 10 years old, slight and quick, with eyes that held too much understanding for his age. He had left 2 days ago, swallowed by the storm. Gone to find help. A neighbor miles away, if the neighbor still lived, if the path could be found beneath the snow. It was a fool's errand, a desperate, child's gamble against impossible odds. He had looked so small bundled in his worn coat, his face a mask of grim determination. She hadn't had the strength to stop him, barely the voice to whisper a plea to be careful. The silence he left behind was deafening, filled only with the wind and her own weakening pulse. She drifted in and out of consciousness, the world blurring between the rough logs of the cabin walls and the blinding white chaos of the blizzard outside. Her thoughts were fragmented, sharp shards of memory. Her mother's face, gone too soon. Her father's promise to return, a promise the harsh land had broken. The slow gnawing of loneliness since they were orphaned, left to scratch a living from unforgiving soil. Now, even that precarious existence teetered on the brink, threatened by sickness and the merciless elements. She was adrift, helpless, the last ember of her hope flickering low, tied solely to a small boy lost somewhere in the white abyss. The cabin felt like a tomb, sealing her fate with every gust of wind that rattled the window panes. She closed her eyes, picturing Finn's face, trying to send him strength across the miles of snow, praying for a miracle she no longer truly believed in. The cold deepened, promising an end. She woke to the scent of wood smoke, stronger than before, and the sound of movement. Not the wind this time, but deliberate, heavy footsteps outside. A knot of pure terror seized her. Bandits? Wolves driven mad by hunger? Finn couldn't have returned so soon, and certainly not with help from so far. The door creaked open slowly, letting in a blast of cold air and a shape silhouetted against the swirling snow. Not a neighbor. Taller, broader. A man. He stepped inside, shaking snow from a thick, fur-lined coat. He didn't speak, his face obscured by the shadow of his hat and the low light. Alara could only stare, her breath catching in her throat, every instinct screaming danger. He moved with a quiet competence that was unsettling. He didn't look at her immediately, his eyes scanning the small cabin, assessing the space, the meager supplies, the dying fire. He carried a rifle and a pack. He looked like he belonged to the wild, weather-beaten and self-sufficient, a part of the unforgiving landscape rather than a visitor to it. He knelt by the hearth, adding dry wood from his pack, coaxing the flames higher with practiced hands. The heat spread slowly, a tentative warmth pushing back the cold. Only then did he turn his attention to her. His face was rough-hewn, lined by sun and wind, framed by dark, unkempt hair and a thick beard. His eyes, when they met hers, were a startling, clear gray, assessing but unreadable. There was no immediate threat in them, but no warmth either. Just a steady, quiet watchfulness. He didn't ask questions. He simply observed her shallow breathing, the flush on her cheeks, the way her body trembled. He reached into his pack, pulling out a small tin. He took some snow from the windowsill, melted it in a pot over the fire, and mixed something into the water, a pungent herbal smell. He helped her sit up, supporting her back with a surprisingly gentle hand. He held the cup to her lips. Alara hesitated, fear warring with a desperate need. He waited patiently, his gaze steady. Something in his stillness, his lack of urgency or judgment, quieted the frantic pulse of her fear. She drank. The liquid was bitter but warm, soothing her raw throat. He eased her back down, adjusted the blankets, and then, without a word, began to methodically unpack. He had food, dried meat, hardtack, even a small bag of beans. He had more wood, stacked neatly outside the door he'd closed securely behind him. He had skills. He fixed a drafty window with a piece of canvas, checked the roof. He was a presence in the cabin, quiet and constant. Alara watched him, her fevered mind trying to make sense of him. Where had he come from? How had he found her? Was he the unlikely hero Finn had set out to find? Or had he found Finn? The thought sent a fresh wave of panic through her. She wanted to ask, needed to know, but her voice was weak, barely a whisper. He seemed to sense her distress. He stopped what he was doing and looked at her. "Rest," he said, his voice a low rumble and used to speaking. "You are safe now, safe." The word felt foreign, fragile. He didn't explain, didn't offer details. He simply stated it and resumed his quiet work. As the day wore on, and the storm outside showed no sign of abating, a different kind of quiet settled inside the cabin. Not the silence of despair, but a shared silence, punctuated by the crackling fire and the man's steady movements. He ate his sparse meal, offering her a small portion she managed to keep down. He slept near the fire, rifle beside him, a sentinel guarding against the night. And Alara, watching his broad back rise and fall with each breath, felt the first hesitant tendrils of something other than fear, a fragile thread of safety, woven not from words, but from the quiet, capable presence of this unexpected stranger. The fever broke slowly over the next few days, retreating like a defeated army, leaving Alara weak but clear-headed. She watched Silas, the man who had arrived like a ghost from the storm, as he worked. He was a man of few words, perhaps 10 in an entire day, but his actions spoke volumes. He tended the fire, rationed their dwindling food, and spent hours sharpening his knife, his movements precise and focused. He checked the storm outside constantly, scanning the impenetrable white with those piercing gray eyes. He never spoke of Finn. The silence on that subject was a heavy weight in the small cabin. Alara longed to ask, but feared the answer. His silence felt less like evasion and more like a stoic acceptance of what the blizzard might have claimed. She understood. In this world, sentiment was a luxury, and survival the only currency. One afternoon, as the snow finally began to ease into a weary drizzle, a new sound reached them. A low, guttural growl from outside the cabin door. Silas stiffened, his hand going instantly to his rifle. Alara, still weak but able to sit up, felt a surge of adrenaline. Through the single, small window, she saw it, a large, gaunt wolf, its eyes fixed on the cabin, drawn perhaps by the smell of smoke or the faint scent of food. It was a predator, hungry and bold. Silas moved silently, positioning himself by the door. He didn't make a sound. The wolf padded closer, sniffing the air. Alara's heart hammered against her ribs. She wasn't useless, not entirely. Reaching beside her, she found a heavy length of firewood. It was a pathetic weapon against a wolf, but she would not simply lie there and wait. Silas glanced at her, a flicker of something in his eyes, not surprise, perhaps a grudging acknowledgement. The wolf lunged. Silas reacted with lightning speed. The rifle cracked, loud and violent in the confined space. The wolf yelped, a sound of pain and frustration, and retreated back into the trees, not fatally hit, but warned off. The silence that followed was thick, broken only by their rapid breathing and the settling snow. Silas lowered the rifle, his gaze still on the trees. He didn't look at Alara. She dropped the firewood, her hands trembling. They had faced a threat together. It was a small thing, her useless piece of wood and his decisive shot, but the shared moment, the implicit understanding of danger and defense, solidified something between them. It wasn't trust built on shared stories or emotional confessions. It was trust forged in the stark reality of survival, in the unspoken agreement to face down the wolves at the door, be they animal, human, or the unforgiving land itself. Alara looked at this man, this rough, silent stranger who had appeared from the storm, and saw not an enigma or a threat, but a shield, a partner in the quiet, brutal dance of staying alive. Her fear hadn't vanished, but it was now tempered with a steely resolve she hadn't known she possessed. Days blurred into a week, the storm receding to reveal a world of dazzling, treacherous white under a cold blue sky. The immediate danger had passed, the wolf didn't return, and their small supply of food, carefully rationed by Silas, saw them through. Elara slowly regained her strength, moving from the bed to sitting by the fire, then eventually standing and taking a few shaky steps. Silas remained a silent presence, watchful and capable. He spent hours outside, clearing snow, setting snares, always with that quiet intensity. He still didn't speak of Finn and Elara, though her heart ached with the unspoken question, found she could wait. This new existence, side by side with the stoic stranger, was a fragile piece she didn't want to shatter. One afternoon, Silas came back to the cabin, his face unreadable as always. He knelt by the fire, warming his hands. Elara watched him, a familiar knot of anxiety tightening in her stomach. He met her gaze, and for the first time, there was a flicker of something soft in those gray eyes. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, wooden bird, crudely carved but instantly recognizable as Finn's work. He held it out to her. "Found it," he said, his voice low. Caught in a drift, near the edge of the valley. He didn't need to say more. Elara's breath hitched. Not found him. Found it. The valley edge was miles away, in the direction of the nearest dwelling. Finn had made it further than she could have imagined. Her throat tightened, tears blurring her vision. She took the little bird, clutching it tightly. It was a tangible piece of her brother's courage, his impossible hope. He hadn't given up, and because of him, she had survived. Silas watched her, offering no platitudes, just his quiet presence. In that shared silence, a profound understanding passed between them. He had come because Finn had reached him, or had left a sign that only someone like him could read in the wilderness. He had saved her life, not out of obligation, but perhaps from a deep, buried sense of decency, or a solitary man's unexpected response to a child's desperate plea. Looking at the little wooden bird, then at Silas's weathered face, Elara felt a wave of something powerful, grief, yes, but also fierce gratitude and a newfound strength. She had faced death, faced the wilderness, and survived. She wasn't the helpless girl who had been left behind. She was a woman forged in fire and snow. "Thank you," she whispered, the words inadequate but necessary. Silas nodded, a small, almost imperceptible dip of his head. He looked out the window at the vast, silent landscape. "Winter's long," he said finally. "Best to stay put for a while." It wasn't an order, but a simple statement of fact, an offer of continued, quiet partnership. Elara looked at him, the unlikely hero her brother's courage had found, and then at the wooden bird in her hand. The world was still harsh, life still uncertain. But she was no longer alone, and the resilience that had been buried deep within her had bloomed in the most desolate of places. Her brother's love, her own will to live, and the quiet strength of a stranger had seen her through. She held the bird, a symbol of love and loss, and looked towards the future, not with fear, but with a quiet, unyielding dignity. She would honor Finn's sacrifice by living, truly living, with the strength he had helped her find.